Good morning. Can you hear me? Hello.
Yes, we can. Yes,
Good
we can,
morning.
Mr.
Yes. Our regional
Yeah.
executive director, Tirso Parian, cannot make it today to virtually extend to you his message. So it's our sincere apologies. He's right now with another Zoom meeting with our all regional executive directors of DENR for the preparation of our next week's budget hearing. So again, our apology. But before I start reading his prepared speech, I would like to congratulate organizers, speakers, and participants of this conference. Allow me to read his message. Isang makakalikasang umaga po sa inyong lahat. I hope that you, your loved ones, and your colleagues are all safe and well. Please allow me to share my thoughts today. Honestly, I've never experienced an event with such a drastic impact on how we live and work as a COVID-19 pandemic. But now, more than ever, we must do the right things and be prepared to take steps beyond what we're typically required to do. So, I'd like to convey my sincerest appreciations to the organizers, Wetland International Philippines Program, for coming up with the activity. Indeed, in the current situation, it is vital to stay connected with our clients, employees, communities, and our partners in environmental protection. Beyond this activity that you organized today, I would like to commend you for the effort and the commitment in building the resilience of the communities and enhancing the ability of the people to bounce back from extreme disasters and events. You have been actively and effectively connecting with partners and the community even before the pandemic that we experience today. Your effort epitomizes the department's banner campaign on Tayo ang Kalikasan, which aims to strengthen collaborative efforts among the governments, locals, and stakeholders to protect our natural resources and to maintain the ecological balance for today's generation and that of the future. In particular, I am elated with your attention towards the enhancement and sustainable management of the Leyte Sab-a Peatland Forest and Cluster 5 River Basin. The Leyte Sab-a Peatland in the promote diverse the forest as carbon storage plays an important services they provide are multiple. Yet, these valuable resources are facing major issues and threats that we need to address. This is where we come in as public servants and environmental advocates in order to come up with the best plan of action and for our peatlands, rivers, environment in general. We need to put to our heart our desires for the environment and the people that depends on it, keeping in mind that these desires are to be accomplished with sincere actions. We need to collaborate and join everyone everyone's participation indulge into a collective action. All of us should join forces for the environment. May this webinar, although done in the new normal, yield a fruitful, effective, efficient, and sustainable plan that promotes the sustainable management of the Sab-a Basin peatland forest and the Leyte Cluster 5 River Basin. May our plans and actions sustain livelihood to reduce poverty, reduce threats to environment, and contribute to the biodiversity conservation and climate mitigation. To all of you, thank you so much. My warmest felicitations for the effort. May God bless us all. Thank you.
Thank you very much, ARD Arsenas. Apologies for being disconnected earlier. I hope doesn't happen again. ARD Arsenas message.
Bascos.
Sorry, ARD Bascos message inspires us to work together more closely with the DENR 8 as well as the consortium in the Leyte Sab-a Basin. Thank you. To follow closely next, I'd like to call on my country representative, Dr. Annadel Cabanban, to introduce the webinar and our resource persons. Annadel.
Thank you very much. Maraming salamat po, Mr. Bascos, for reading the presentation or message of DNR Regional Director, Mr. Parian. We are very inspired by your talk, and can you please convey our gratitude to Mr. Parian. Magandang umaga po sa inyong lahat. Ako ay si Annadel Cabanban, Country Representative ng Wetlands International Philippines Program. Next slide, please. You may be wondering why Wetlands International is here in Eastern Leyte. Wetlands International supports the mandate of the government in the Ramsar Convention, which is for the conservation of wetlands for people and nature. We are here because of a short story. Let me tell you a short story. Next slide, please. Way back in the aftermath of Yolanda, the governments of the Philippines and the Dutch government gathered together stakeholders, the national governmental agencies, the local agencies, and various stakeholders. There is more than 10. And they came up with a coastal protection strategy. This coastal protection strategy was GIS-based, that is Global Information System-based. They gather all the secondary information, put it together, and it was multi-sectoral, and the result was a coastal protection strategy, which is a combination or a matrix of green and gray infrastructure. So Wetlands International was interested to support the implementation of the strategy when we got a new phase of the Partners for Resilience Project 2016-2020. Next slide, please. In this Partners for Resilience project, we are promoting integrated risk management. Integrated risk management is basically environmental management and restoration, climate change adaptation, and disaster risk reduction. In general, the flow of the strategy involves, particularly for Wetlands International, is having the preparatory work, the scoping and others, the development of an integrated risk management plan, which I'll tell you more about that in the next slide, and the preparation of an investment management plan, which will support the implementation of the plan. This is Trajectory 3 under the Partners for Resilience project. Next slide, please. The trajectory towards building resilience and sustainability in an ecosystem that we are trying to conserve is basically a series of steps. It's not done overnight. First, there is the landscape assessment. And when we know what are the threats, the risk in the landscape, we can then make a plan. This is what's called the landscape management plan. When we have the plan, we can then develop an action plan. These are specific actions that we can undertake under different aspects. When we have a plan, we can then make a cost or how much it will cost and make a business plan. If we have the cost of the plan, then we can raise funds from the government as well as from the private sector and have what we call the landscape financial fund or support. And one of these could be the payment for ecosystem services. When a plan based on science, based on stakeholder consultation, based on specific actions is invested on, it will be implementable, it will then be sustainable, and then it will lead to the resilience of the community to disasters, to natural or both man-made disasters. This is what we believe the trajectory to resilience and the theory of change to building resilience in a certain landscape or seascape. Next slide, please. So Wetlands International prepared for Partners for Resilience Project Implementation 2016-2020. We wanted to build on the outputs and outcomes of that project. And we met with stakeholders, and in the process, we learned that there is a review of the river basins or rivers in Eastern Leyte, I'm sorry. And we learned that this was ongoing. This was led by the University of the Philippines. And we wanted to support and contribute to these efforts. So in this picture, you can see a clear tributary of a river. Its waters are leading to the sea, and we hope that this kind of water remains throughout the river basin. Excuse the wrong apostrophe there. Next slide, please. While discussing with stakeholders in 2017, 2018, and meeting with members of the local governments. And one day in 2018, you can see the picture here below. We saw flooding along the road leading to Palo. This is on the coastal road. And this is 1 month after a 1 week depression or too much rainfall that fell on Tacloban, Palo, and Tanawan. This was just at the outlier of the depression that hit Mindanao. And as a result, you can see this flooding. And I found out that this flooding was due to the disruption of the hydrological flow of the waters from the watershed to the Sab-a Peatland, which was once a swamp. It was a storage of water, but it was drained in the 70s for agriculture. And as a result, there is this flooding that pervades in the coastal communities. So I realized that the threat to these floods are common. They happen every year during rainy season, or even just during extreme events. This threat is is important to address than a 1 in 100 year storm. So next slide, please. So in the course of time, I was able to meet the project manager then of the Sab-a Peatland, and he informed me that there is an ongoing work in the Sab-a Peatland, as well as the review of the Cluster 5 River Basin. And we agreed to work together to a common good. And today we're very fortunate that we have speakers, Forester Ivy, Victor Ivy Chu, Ms. Juvelin Salazar, and Dr. Judith Homadja, who can give us updates on these developments, management planning, which we, Wetlands International, joined and supported in the course of time. Next slide, please. So in this webinar, we will have learned at the end of the day the status of the Leyte Cluster 5 River Basin and Sab-a Peatland plans. We will learn instruments and approaches in business planning, such as the business canvas, the landscape investment fund, including payment for ecosystem services, which will lead to realistic implementation of the plans and towards sustainability and resilience. And lastly, ways that public and private sectors can support and enhance the management plans. Next slide, please. We are very fortunate to have two resource persons here. Ms. Mila Mercado Bunker, who holds a master's degree of science in industrial relations. She has taught in many training programs here in the Philippines, as well as in the region. And she has worked with us in the business planning for the Cagayan de Oro River Basin Management Plan. And she is in the course of implementing support for Agusan River Basin Management Plan. Next slide, please. Our second resource person is Dr. Hailey Roa Kiawit. She holds a degree in natural resources management. She is a professor in a local university in Cagayan de Oro. She is the executive director of the Cagayan de Oro River Basin Management Council. And she also is our resource person for integrated river basin management planning in Agusan River Basin. Dr. Hailey has spearheaded the payment for ecosystem services in Cagayan de Oro River Basin, and we work together in the Reach to Coast, Rain to Top project to reduce the risk to flooding. So she carries with her a lot of practical experience as well. Next slide, please. So today, I wish you an informative webinar. Mabuhay po kayo. Thank you very much.
Salamat, Annadel, for your informative presentation, as well as the introduction to our resource person. We will follow this very closely with immediately with two presentations to be made by Ms. Juvelin Salazar of IIRR, as you know, is the International Institute for Rural Reconstruction, which heads the consortium that's hoping to manage the Leyte Sab-a Basin Peatland Forest Restoration Initiative. And followed closely by Dr. Judith Homadja of the Visayas State University Alang-Alang campus. Dr. Homadja will be presenting a study on payment for ecosystem services in the Leyte Sab-a Peatland Forest. Let us now welcome Juvie Salazar, Dormitorio. Juvie?
Okay. Hello, good morning. Is my audio clear? Okay, sure. Okay, good morning, everyone, and thank you for Wetlands International for inviting us here. Um, Miss Mila, my presentation. I can't see my presentation yet. Can you check? Okay, so I will be presenting today the status of the Leyte Sab-a Peatland Forest Sustainable Management Plan. And my discussion will focus on the core agenda for topics, which is the brief background of the Leyte Sab-a Basin Peatland Forest, and the previous and the current proposed management options and strategies, the different previous studies conducted. Now I'll just show it, and then what are the legal and scientific findings, updates to be considered in the management strategies and planning, and also the challenges and the recommendations. So just to set the mode of my presentation, generally the current Leyte Sab-a Peatland Forest Initiative project aims to come up with an enhanced Leyte Sab-a Sustainable Peatland Management Plan. So that is why we are currently implementing the Leyte Sab-a Peatland Forest Restoration Initiative. This is a 4 years project with its overall goal is to protect and restore and manage the Leyte Sab-a Basin peatland area to sustain its ecosystem services. This is funded by the Forest Foundation Philippines, which IIRR is the lead implementer, and with the local partner ELAC facilitating the legal research, and the Visayas State University for the ongoing 12 scientific research. In fact, after this presentation, Dr. Judith will also show their studies on the economic valuation, focusing on the PES, or Payment Existing Services, and the weavers on social mobilization and local stakeholders, capacity building, and alternative suitable livelihood interventions in the peatland area. So one of the major output of this project is to come up with a proposed sustainable peatland management plan, which the previous proposed management options will serve as a guide or reference. So this is the study area that we are covering right now. We have the three municipalities of San Miguel, Alang-Alang, and Santa Fe, all in the province of Leyte. So as we all know, the peat swamp forest, next slide please, sorry. So as we all know, the peat swamp forest is included in the 12 forest formations of the Philippines. And it is written by Edwino Fernando, which is also our research consultant at present. And a speedstone forest is actually are oligotrophic or low in nutrients terrestrial wetland ecosystems that have high soil acidity and are low in nutrients. Actually, I can see the screen. I can see the presentation in my screen. And an important component of the world's wetlands provide a wide range of valuable environmental services and ecological functions. Miss Mila, can you please put in the next slide, please? I can see this presentation in my screen. Number five slide. The next slide. Next slide. Okay, got it. And so we are actually using the definition of the peat soil containing at least 65% organic matter. The peat is formed when the rate of accumulation exceeds the rate of the decomposition. Next slide, please. So the Leyte Sab-a Basin peatland forest is one among the two major confirmed peatlands in the Philippines. But according to DNR BMB right now, there are 9 confirmed peatlands in the Philippines. And in the 1970s, the government
Sorry, Juvie, you are muted. Juvie.
Hello? Hello?
Okay, please proceed,
Okay.
Juvie.
Okay. I'll just repeat this slide. the Leyte Sab-a Peatland Forest is one among the two major confirmed peatlands in the Philippines. And in 1970s, the government intends to make the area a food basket for Leyte. And the swamp was drained, cleared, and burned for agricultural development and abandoned afterwards due to deep water and not suitable for agriculture. So please bear with me. I'm using the laptop of my colleague Chris because I can see the slides in my screen. And next slide, please. Oh, so I would like to share with you, this is the history. Now, after the latest Sab-a Basin Development Authority management in 1970s and 1980s, these are the different research studies and project interventions in the Leyte Sab-a Peatland Forest. So as you can see, in 1990, the inventory of the Philippine wetlands was carried out. In 1999, the environmental evaluation of the swamps and marshlands with the ADB study in partnership with the NIA for the irrigation system improvement project is to actually this study is a very comprehensive study about the Leyte Sab-a Basin. And after 10 years, here comes the 2010-2014 APFU funded project by GEF, and along with also in 2011, the 2015 to 2015, the Sustainable Management of Peat and Forest, or the CPET. All these two projects was a pilot project of regional office in DNR, Region 8, in partnership with DNR BMP. So this is actually aims to promote the sustainable management of the peat and forest in Southeast Asia. And after those projects, after after 2 years, the DNR Region 8, IIRR, and Forest Foundation spearheaded the conduct of stakeholder consultation and to develop the current project. I guess Sir Jerome is here, and he is the mastermind of this project. Thank you, Sir Jerome. And in 2017, while waiting also for the approval of this project by the Forest Foundation, the DNR and the BSU Alang-Alang formulated the latest Sab-a Peatland Management Plan. It is actually 2018 to 2025. And in 2018, fortunately, the 4 years project was approved by the Forest Foundation Philippines and started its implementation on January 15, 2018. Next slide, please. Okay, so you can see here, this is the original map of the Leyte Sab-a Basin landscape, the whole landscape of Leyte Sab-a Basin, the Peatland Forest. This is 1955 from the Nambia. And discovered actually the four municipalities, the San Miguel, Alang-Alang, Santa Fe, and Palo. And on the four municipalities, the Palo swamp is less explored and studied and even not part of the current project, even the APFP project. So based on this map, it shows there that the peatland has 76% classification as A and B, while only 24% is a public land or timberland. While on the right side, you can see that this shows the project coverage which was used also by the APFP and the TP pilot project in 2012, 2015, and also what the project is using right now. And you can observe that the remaining unutilized remnant of the Bistrom forest was reduced to 1,286 hectares. So next slide, please. So these are the existing proposed management framework and strategies in the Leyte Sab-a Basin Peatland Forest. Along the way that we have been conducting this project, we were able to gather this information. So in 2000, the ADB study, this is the environmental evaluation of swamps and marshlands, which also include the Kapirawan and the Dagitan marshland in Leyte. And they have described actually the Leyte Sab-a as a strict nature reserve under the category of NIPAS law. And in 2018, after 18 years, sorry, the DNR Region 8 and BSU Alang-Alang formulated the plan in which some of the current interventions of the project is part of the proposed plan. And through this project, by 2021, we hope to come up an enhanced management plan based from the legal and scientific research and the information derived in the implementation of this current project, and also integrate and complement those existing proposed plans. Next slide, please. So what are the legal and scientific research findings to consider in the management planning? Next slide, please. Next slide, Ms. Mila. Yeah, thank you. So this is the ADB study. They actually shows the proposed conservation and conversion area where part of Alang-Alang Santa Fe was for conservation. And you can see here the zoning they have identified in their ADB study. And you can see the proposed core zone that is part of the upland forest or watershed, which they also include that it should also be protected because of its interconnection with the wetland. Some of the faunal species move from these two ecosystems, so the water movement is dependent on the quality of the watershed that affects water levels in terms of erosion of sediments within the wetland. So therefore, it is actually a landscape watershed approach in protecting the peatland. So you do not only protect the peatland, but the surrounding watershed in the area. And you can see also the core zone. They describe the area as a maximum protection must be imposed and strictly protected. And the buffer zone, only activities compatible with protection of the core zone should take place, and the transition zone supports human settlement, and a range of human activities and agricultural activities will be allowed. Okay, so this is basically a good management strategies proposed during the ADB study way back in 2000. Next slide, please. So and now, based on the initial results of the current project, we have recommended this management strategies and zoning. So you can see the protection and conservation in parcel 1 because we consider an intact vegetation still, and this is located in the barangays of Tabanguhay and Langit. And the reversion is part of Barangay Divisoria and Langit because actually the mother flowa here, which is about 137 hectares, is basically found here in Barangay Langit. And the restoration or the rehabilitation in parcel 3, parcel 2B, located in the barangays of Divisoria and San Isidro. Both parcels are found to be degraded as the area was subjected to draining since 1970 up to present. And based also on the initial result of the hydrology study that we have come up right now, it shows that during dry season, the water level here in Barangay San Isidro, the lower part, the parcel 2B, is actually 1.5 meters below the peat surface. While during rainy season, the highest recorded water level is 1.2 meters above the peat surface. So next slide, please. Okay. So also based on the geoinformatics study that we have been conducting right now through Dr. Pastor Garcia, BSU by VIII, they also found out that there are two river systems that contributes water into the peatland area. So you can see the Sangkutan River and the Bangun River. So the boundary of these two watersheds is found also in the Leyte Sab-a Basin peatland forest. So the other water drains to the Sangkutan River, and the other one drains down to the Bangun River down to Palo area. So next slide, please. Okay, we also found out different vegetation in the area. Like we have the agro-ecotype in which agricultural activities is being conducted there. And we have the forest ecotype where there are still a lot of trees like lanipo in the area. And we have the grassland ecotype basically found in San Isidro, grassland and sedges. So next slide, please. Next slide. Okay. So we also identified, the geoinformatics also identified three possible peat domes in the Sab-a Peatland with the presence of the physical barrier, as you can see there, between the parcel 1, the parcel 2A, and the parcel 2B. So that's a physical barrier that holds both the organic material and the water in situ or in place that favors in the formation of the peat soil. So next slide, please. So next slide, please. So Dr. Pastor also used the LiDAR technology in which the location of a pit dome was identified by running a profile analysis across the ground surface. So you can see from point A to B, and it shows that the accumulated peat soil is about 6 meters, but it has to be validated yet by our research team. So they have to go there. This is actually in Barangay Tabamuhay, so in parcel 1. Next slide, please. Okay, with regards to the land tenure status, ELAC was able to validate the 1,064 hectares of CARP distributed land and 661 agrarian reform beneficiaries. Next slide, please. So ultimately, the previous slide, the previous slide, previous slide, Miss Mila, previous slide, Miss Mila. No, no, previous. After the map, after the map, before that. Okay. So ultimately, the validation and profiling resulted the following findings. So out of the 1,064 hectares CARP distributed land of the 4 barangays in the covering the municipalities of Alang-Alang and Santa Fe, ELAC found out that there are 437 hectares or equivalent of 41.07% of the total area is uncultivated and awarded to unknown ARB. So ELAC highlighted those unknown ARB and those uncultivated properties. Both the awarded lands involved are uncultivated, which means that these lands are not productive and did not actually serve the very purpose why they were awarded. Technically, non-cultivation of the property awarded is a very strong ground for the cancellation of a certain CLOA. In addition, as articulated, the reason why these lands remain uncultivated is because these lands are either covered by water or when tilled, significant amount of waters are found in the land which makes it impossible to cultivate. So this means that if the flowers of the lands involved are cancelled, then the reversion process may be initiated of at least 41%. And of course, the 41% may also be reverted back to its original classification as a peat swamp forest. Next slide, please. Yeah. And another findings also um, uh, on the physical and the biodiversity results that we have with the scientific research by the VSU. As of 2019, the identified deepest peat depth is 14 meters. So there is a study in the central Kalimantan that it takes about 140 years to reach a depth of 0.5 to 1 meter. So an 8 to 10 meters depth normally takes about 13,000 to 25 years to form. Thus, if we have 14 meters depth in Leyte Sab-a, it means that the peat formation now in Leyte is almost more than 25,000 years. And with the biodiversity also findings, they were able to find the Philippine hanging parrot as critically endangered, the Philippine duck as vulnerable, and also we identified one endemic species, the locally known pantak, which is IUCN status is near threatened, and the Philippine tarsier with the red list category and criteria nearly threatened and population trend is decreasing. So next slide, please. So there are also challenges in the Leyte Sab-a Peatland forest, especially with the 2 years of experience that we have, during dry season, an alarming peat fires continues to happen in the peatland. Some due to burning of rice paddies and after harvest, and some are intentional. Some do the illegal fishing because they have to burn first the sedges and the grasses before they can catch fish in the area. So this is basically a conversion to agriculture, and training is also one of the biggest major problems or challenges in the Leyte Sab-a. Next slide, please. Aside from that, there are also, as you can see there, just in Barangay San Isidro, this is the extent, based on the Google Earth map, this is the extent of fire in Barangay San Isidro alone. Okay, so next slide, please. I have few more slides left. Okay, another one, major challenges is the illegal conversion and the illegal quarrying. Why we say this illegal? Because there are no permits or other informations that can prove their operations in the area. Next slide, please. Next slide. Okay, next slide. Yeah, my conclusion. So, generally, the status of the plan right now, the project is aiming to come up with a proposed sustainable peatland management plan, which integrate and complement previous and current management plans. But in order to facilitate a harmonized sustainable peatland management plan, the following are the major recommendations. The first one is to institutionalize the creation of the consortium or a multi-stakeholder alliance that will support, commit, take the accountability, and serve as frontliners in formulating and updating the management plans, and even in the implementation of the management plans. Unless there is no structure and commitment of key agencies, all the research effort, information provided will just be a paper. So the two existing proposed management plan lacks the management structure who will take charge in putting into actions those proposed strategies. And the second one is to strengthen the coordination of key agencies like the DAR, the DNR, and LGUs to initiate the process of reversion back to public forest land. Even in the ADB study, they have recommended that the full zone should be back, reverted back to its original peat swamp forest. And also, the ADB study is enough to support the claims of the DAR needing proof of the area of the peat swamp forest. But the current legal research project prove enough also that there are actually 40% of crop distributed land of peatlands which is uncultivated and abandoned, and even distributed to unknown beneficiaries. So the next one is, of course, the policy to establish the Leyte Sab-a Basin Peatland Forest as a local conservation area through a joint LCA ordinance covering the 3 municipalities and even in Palo. And next is the agrarian reform beneficiaries. We also need to look on the opinion also and the side of the ARBs. They have to be consulted and involved in the reversion process and restoration activities. Perhaps the DNR and DAR can strategize also what kind of strategy in which to accommodate also their existing status. And lastly is to finalize the guidelines on sustainable development planning and management of peatlands formulated through the DNR BMB. And I think the DNR BMB is working on this. We hope that once we draft the enhanced management plan, we can now use the guidelines on this management planning for specifically for the peatlands. So lastly, we will also apply the principles of restoration like the rewetting, revegetation, and revitalization of livelihoods in the Leyte Sab-a Peatland forest. Next slide, please. I just would like to show some of the major activities that we have conducted in the area, and thank you for our partners here for making this project and also this activities a successful one. So that ends my presentation, and thank you so much for listening.
Damo nga salamat, Juvie. Thank you very much for the presentation. This presentation on the status, the current status of the Leyte Sab-a Peatland Forest Management Plan will be followed closely by a presentation of Dr. Judith Majao, which is an update on economic valuation studies on the restoration option for the Leyte Sab-a Peatland Forest. Dr. Majao, please.
Okay, good morning, everyone. Joining in the Zoom room and watching on Facebook. So my topic, my study is one of the 13 researches conducted by BSU Alang-Alang. And my study is on the economic valuation for the protection and restoration of the Leyte Sab-a Basin peatland. So as we all know, the peatland provides various ecosystems in services to communities. And these ecosystem services include the provisioning services, regulating services, cultural services, and supporting services. Next slide, please. Okay. So the Leyte Sab-a Basin peatland is a second largest peatland in the Philippines. That has a unique ecosystem, which has a diverse flora and fauna, and a carbon store. Okay, so it has 3,088 hectares, according.
Dr. Judith, nakamute kayo.
Okay na po.
Go ahead, please. Go ahead.
So, peatland provides various ecosystem services to the communities. So, and these ecosystems, as identified by MEA in 2005, includes the provisioning services, regulating services, cultural services, and supporting services. So the Leyte Sab-a Basin peatland is the second largest peatland in the Philippines that has a unique ecosystem and is also a carbon store. So the Leyte Sab-a Basin ecosystem has also been the source of food and income of the local communities. Next slide, please. So considering the threats of this remaining peatland forest, due to the increasing demand for food by the increasing population, the Leyte Sab-a Basin peatland has been reclaimed for agriculture in the 1970s. So this Bancom project from the Department of Agriculture converted the peatland to food basket in Leyte, resulting to its land cover degradation. So this project drained the peatlands and distribute the land parcels to the farmers in a form of a cloa, and they converted 49% of peatland area to farmlands. So the construction of drainage has led to the shrinkage and oxidation of the peat, and that led to the observed and persistent flooding in the area, including the nearby municipalities where the peatland drains in the Bangon River, which is Palo and Santa Cruz. Considering the threats to the remaining peatland forest in the Leyte Sab-a Basin peatland, the conservation and sustainable use of the peatland forest remains a very important and critical issue which immediate attention. So information regarding the economic value of peatland is needed in order to develop an economically efficient strategy to protect the area, hence this study. So this study's valuation result can therefore serve as a benchmark for analyzing the impacts of future interventions to improve natural resources quality and for estimating the payment of environmental services provided by the Leyte Sab-a Basin peatland ecosystem. So the objective of the study includes to to estimate the provisioning values of the services provided by the Leyte Sab-a Basin peatland ecosystem, estimate the regulating values of the Leyte Sab-a Basin peatland against flooding using the damage cost method, and to estimate the willingness to pay of households for the protection of the Leyte Sab-a Basin peatland using contingent valuation method. Next slide, please. So the study used the framework, the model used by the economics of ecosystems and biodiversity, in which the 4 categories of the ecosystem services and total economic value are incorporated in a single framework. So, however, in this study, we just used only the provisioning values and the regulating values that was estimated in the study. So, next slide, please. Okay, to estimate the provisioning values of the Leyte Sab-a Basin peatland, so we interviewed a total of 302 respondents, randomly selected from the 1,218 households in the 4 barangays inside the Leyte Sab-a Basin peatland. So these are 3 barangays in Alang-Alang and 1 barangay in Santa Fe, Leyte. So the respondents were asked on the different resources collected from Leyte Sab-a Basin peatland. We used focus group discussion and did some local market information on the different prices of these resources, and each resource were identified were valued using the existing local market prices, and we call that direct valuation techniques. So to estimate the regulating services of the Leyte Sab-a Basin peatland, we interviewed 315 respondents from 13 barangays in Palo and Santa Fe, Leyte, who are the receiver of the floods when the Leyte Sab-a Basin overflows. So this information, the information taken from these respondents were asked on the amount of damages to properties during the flooding, and during this study, the information was from the tropical depression Basyang in 2018. So the value that were taken represents the value of estimated damages or the amount people will spend during flooding if the Leyte Sab-a Basin peatland are not restored. So damage cost avoided was used. This is a cost-based method to estimate the economic value of ecosystem services due to lost services. So services because of the land covered degradation of the Leyte Sab-a Basin peatland. So to estimate the willingness to pay of households for the restoration of the Leyte Sab-a Basin peatland, we conducted the personal survey using a pre-tested interview schedule to elicit from the respondents how much they are willing to pay to protect or restore the Leyte Sab-a Basin peatland. So we interviewed the 315 respondents from the 8 barangays and Palo and 7 barangays in Santa Fe, Leyte. Next slide, please. So as the result of the study showed that there are livelihood activities still dependent on peatland resources. So these are the 46% are on fishing activities. Others are on rice farming, firewood collection, bird hunting, root crops farming, non-timber, and wild pig collection. Next slide, please. So, giving valuing the provisioning services provided by the Leyte Sab-a Basin,
So the annual provisioning values provided by the Sab-a Basin is 5,450,683. So composed of the subsistence values. Usually these are the resources that were consumed by the respondents, and the annual cash value. These are the values usually sold by the resources that are being sold by the respondents. Okay, next slide, please. So we also asked the estimated cost of damage brought about by flooding, for example. Okay, so these are the damages to personal property, damages to crops, damages to houses, lost income from employment, lost revenues, damage to small businesses, and lost income from fishing. Okay, so the total value of damage brought about by flooding is 3,884,480.58. So this represents the cost of damages brought about by flooding in Palo and Santa Fe. Next slide, please. So we also tried to determine the willingness to pay of households. 80% or 81% of the total number of total number of respondents are willing to pay. The 80% are willing to pay, and 19% are not willing to pay. Next slide, please. So calculating the mean and aggregate willingness to pay of the respondents. So the mean willingness to pay is 41.65 pesos per month. And for those who have shared their willingness to pay, it's amount to 126,949.20. So with an aggregate willingness to pay, so if you are to compute the 80% of the total number of households of Palo and Santa Fe, the willingness to pay is 2 million, the aggregate willingness to pay is 2,446,221.12 pesos. So the values above were based on the minimum willingness to pay bids. And actually in the interview, we tried to ask for the maximum willingness to pay bid, which was 60 pesos and 31 centavos. Okay, so next slide, please. So we also tried to ask the reasons for their willingness to pay and the reasons for their not willing to pay. So for the reasons for the zero bids, usually the majority have said that they cannot afford to pay any additional amount of money, and others said that the LGU should pay for the protection of the Leyte Sab-a Basin peatland. Others are not sure if they can contribute because they are not. And others says that the national government must be responsible in the protection of the Leyte Sab-a Basin peatland. And others are not satisfied with the present condition of the Leyte Sab-a Basin peatland. And others say that they are not using the Leyte Sab-a Basin for farming. Next slide, please. So the reason for their willingness to pay is that more 42% said that the program is important. The protection for the basin is important. Others said that they are willing to contribute because they wanted that flooding will be minimized in their area. And that others says that they wanted to contribute in protecting or preserving the Leyte Sab-a Basin peatland. And others says that they wanted to help other households from the effect of flooding. And others says that they wanted to protect their livelihood. Next slide, please. Previous. So we also tried to ask on the preferred collection mechanism of their contribution, of their payment, and majority of the respondents, of those willing to pay, said that they wanted other government agency to collect their fees, and this specifically other respondents specifically identified DENR to be the one to collect their contributions. Others said that they want it to through NGOs, and few have identified LGU and barangay LGU to be the preferred collectors of their fees. Next slide, please. So to summarize, the economic values, this may not be the total economic value for the Leyte Sab-a Basin. So the provisioning values amounts to 5,450,683.24. So the regulating values was estimated to be 11,653,351.74, because according to interview to the respondents, they are experiencing an average of three flooding per year in the last 5 years. And then for the willingness to pay for the restoration of the Leyte Sab-a Basin peatland from the respondents, it amounted to 2,446,221.12. Next slide, please. So to summarize, the important peatland resources are still collected in the Leyte Sab-a Basin peatlands, like fish, birds, timber, non-timber, and wildlife species for subsistence and cash income. So the cost of damage is 3,884,450.58 per flooding, represents the cost avoided during the flooding if the Leyte Sab-a Basin is not degraded. So this is the regulating value. And the aggregate annual willingness to pay is 2,446,221.12, which suggests the social willingness to pay of respondents, indicating that the respondents are really concerned about the restoration and conservation of the Leyte Sab-a Basin peatland. So this amount could also be a potential revenue for a restoration program of the Leyte Sab-a Basin peatland. Next slide, please.
Iminda, yun, ano yun?
Previous slide, please. So majority of the respondents need to pay for another government agency as trustees of funds to gain absolute assurance that the fee will solely be used on restoration and protection of the Leyte Sab-a Basin peatland. So respondents from Palo and Santa Fe, Leyte are willing to pay in restoring and protecting Leyte Sab-a Basin peatland. Most important reasons were the importance of the program and minimize the flooding in the area. Thank you very much for listening.
Damo nga salamat, Dr. Judith and Juvie, for your presentations. We have about 5 minutes for questions. May I just remind everyone again to just raise your hands or write down your comments or questions in the chat thread so you can be recognized. Any questions, please? There's one question here from Dr. Kiawit. What's the other government agency that the people are willing to be the fund manager?
Ma'am Judith, you are
Okay.
muted.
Okay, so aside from the DENR identified as the fund managers for the to manage the funds, they identified the Department of Agriculture. These are the only two agencies that they have identified, DA and DENR.
So it's the DA and the DNR.
Yes, yes.
Dr. Judith. J.R. Ragub of the National Economic Development Authority Region 8 would like to ask a question. Go ahead, J.R.
Yes, thank you, Sir Judah. Am I being heard?
Yes, you are
Hello?
heard. Yes, we
Thank
can
you.
hear you.
Thank you, ma'am. My question is for Dr. Humadiao of VSU. Uh, will the secretariat flash it again, the slide that uh, yung nagpapakita ng yung mga damages, amounts of damages due to flooding? Kasi although hindi siya question, clarification lang kasi yes, that's the slide. Yun, damage to personal property, damage to crops, damage to houses. Then we have incorporated here lost income from employment and lost revenue. Somehow, uh, in the methodology kasi ng post-disaster needs assessment, we try to separate as much as possible the cost of damage and the cost of losses. Now, when we talk about lost income from employment and lost revenue from, let's say, business within the area, these are already classified as losses in the PDNA guidelines. Now, my concern is that yung yung amounts dito, saan ba siya naka-base sa actual na account pa coming from the local government unit through their MDRRMO, or just a quantification from the university? Kasi I think for us to be also relevant and be be well anchored with existing guidelines, dapat po natin ma-correct yung quantification at saka yung inclusion ng mga damage and losses. When we talk about damage lang, wala yung losses na part. That's all.
Doc Judith, before you answer that, I think there's a related question here from Dr. Tony Danyo. Still in relation to the valuation study, what is the percentage of the respondents to the universe? Do we have aggregation of amount, willing to pay, and income status? And do you consider damage to elevation to location of respondents? Sige po.
Okay, so first, the first comment is which the estimating of the cost of damage. These are the quantification of the damages given by the respondents. So we just asked on what the amount of damages to personal properties, the amount of damage to lost income. So we tried to ask how many days. These are usually the lost income from employment includes income. Some of them working on some of them working on a daily wage. So 89 of them have identified that they have lost income because they were not able to report to their office during the 3-day flooding period. Okay, so for the other question, which is on the number of respondents. So we just identified the number of households or the number of barangays who were affected by the flooding. So we did not include the other barangays in the municipality of Palo or in the municipality of Santa Fe. That's why I said there that we only identified 8 barangays in Palo and 5 barangays in Santa Fe. Ano? Yes, okay. So the total number of households affected by the flooding is 6,118. So, and we just interviewed 315 respondents. So there are the profile of the respondents I did not include, but it's part of my study. So hello.
Yes, you are back, Dr. Judith.
Okay, so as I have said that we did not include all the barangays in Palo and Santa Fe Leyte. The respondents were just the number of barangays that were affected by flooding, and these are 6,118 households from the 13 barangays, and we only identified 315 households. as part of the sample study. So the profile of the respondents, was not able to include that in my presentation. However, I forgot I don't have the copy of my presentation, but these are most are in Palo. These are the barangays found in the Palo municipality of Palo, the town proper of Palo.
Okay, thank you, Doc Judith. I hope that answers the questions of both J.R. Raghu and Dr. Danyo. I saw Jerome Montemayor raise his hand. Jerome, would you like to ask one final question, please? Go ahead.
Hi, hi, Judah. Glad to be part of the webinar. Actually, Juvie already answered, but maybe for the benefit of others who are here, who may have the the authority and influence to make it happen. Last year, we learned from our friend who is also a peatland champion from Indonesia and the ASEAN that in other countries they are, in terms of managing their peatlands, they are working on the what they call the peatland hydrological unit, which is I think closely related or an equivalent of watershed approach or landscape management. So I was asking earlier because I saw in Juvie's presentation that they are now gearing up for the enhanced management plan. So I was just asking if it was possible to already consider shifting the attention from just the core area of the Leyte Sab-a Peatlands to the wider area that will be the based on the experience of other countries who are ahead of us in terms of peatland management, shifting to a more hydrological peatland hydrological unit based management consideration. So thank you. That was my question.
Thank you. And you said that was already answered by Juvie. Or Juvie, would you like to reiterate your answer on that?
Hello, Sir Judah. Thank you, Sir Jerome. Sinagot ko na po kanina. So siguro I'll just mention that in my previous presentation, I also mentioned that the strategy should not look into the peatland itself, but a landscape watershed approach. And this includes the hydrologic unit. In fact, if you can see the presentations earlier, there are two river watersheds surrounding the peatlands. That's the Piniton River watershed and the Bangona River watershed. And even in our interventions right now, we are actually advocating not to establish any activities that will hamper the peatland and even in the surrounding areas. So we have been advocating to the key agencies, DAR, DNR, and ENB, no? Kasi marami ngayon like yung quarrying. In fact, in Santa Fe, marami ang nag-a-apply for quarrying. And in Alang-Alang, there are existing illegal quarrying. Illegal po, pasensya na, kasi wala nga pong process at wala pang permit na ginagawa. So we hope that with this advocacy also, this facilitates that the approach in protecting and restoring the area is not just in the peatland itself, but the whole watershed surrounding in the peatland. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much, Juvie and Jerome. That ends our first Q&A portion. Let us now segue to the next presentation, which is going to be the larger landscape in the case of Leyte. So we zoomed in earlier to the Leyte Sab-a Peatland. Now we're going to zoom out and at the larger landscape, and that's the Cluster 5 River Basin. To make a presentation is the regional focal point for the River Basin Control Office in Region 8. May we ask Forester Vic Chu to do his presentation. Vic?
Thank you. Naririnig niyo po ako, sir?
Okay
Yes.
lang, Vic. Go ahead.
Okay na, sir?
Okay lang, Vic. Go ahead.
Okay na? Sige. First and foremost, I would like to thank the opportunity given by the Wetlands International to once again popularize, disseminate, and inform the stakeholders on the existence of the Cluster 5 River Basin in Leyte Province. First slide, please. Brief history lang po ng Cluster 5 River Basin. For the past 2 years, DENR Regional Office 8 conducted series of consultations, meetings, and dialogue with the stakeholders from Leyte Province. And last year 2019, ito na po yung output, yung final na master plan ng Cluster 5 River Basin. Next slide, please. Through Executive Orders number 510, 816, and 50, RBCO was mandated to develop and create master plans for the country's river basins to solve environmental problems such as flooding and to provide ample water supply. Next slide, please. The Cluster 5 and Cluster 6 River Basin Master Plans were approved by RDC Resolution number 57 series of 2019 last year. Ito po yung legality na ini-endorse na ng NEDA mismo, na dumanan po ito sa mga subcommittee meetings at saka yung RDC Full Council mismo. Ito na po yun, na-approve. Next slide, please. Cluster 5 River Basin has a total area of 125,625 hectares, composed of major watersheds of Dagitan, Marabong, Binahaan, and Palo. There are 4 minor watersheds, namely Hirona Watershed, Kalbasag Watershed, Rizal Watershed, and Magunbukan Baliri Watershed. Next slide, please. This table shows the areas covered by the respective watersheds covered by Cluster 5 River Basin. Next slide, please. Listed in the table are the municipalities. Actually, 16 municipalities and 3 cities covered by the Cluster 5 Master Plan. Within the major watershed, we have a total of 84,814 hectares, and within the minor watersheds, we have 40,813 hectares. All in all, 125,625 hectares. Next slide, please. This is To characterize Cluster 5 River Basin, 75% equivalent to 94,000 hectares of the river basin is A&D, which are mainly agricultural crops, mostly perennial and annual crops. We have geothermal power reserves such as the existing EDC and Tungonan. Large part of the river basin area, including its economy, had been severely damaged by Typhoon Yolanda. That was last 2013. And the economy of Region 8 is linked to the resources and facilities of Cluster 5 River Basin. And lastly, Cluster 5 River Basin is the center of regional commercial center of Region 8, which is located in Tacloban. Next slide, please. These are the 6 major thematic areas identified in the master plan to be addressed through the implementation of the programs, projects, and activities identified. The forest ecosystem biodiversity would address the indicators such as increased forest cover and to reduce soil erosion rate. Water resources management aimed to increase the water supply, reduce the fecal coliform at the outlet of the river, and to reduce the biological oxygen demand in the waters within the Cluster 5 River Basin. In wetland management, example in the Leyte Sab-a Peatland is to increase and maintain the wetland areas. At DRRM, reduce the number of vulnerable barangays, especially during calamities. And lastly, poverty development aimed to reduce the poverty incidence within Cluster 5 River Basin. Slide, please. In forest ecosystems and biodiversity management, we can see below the solution 3 diagram. Next slide, please. Mamila, next slide. In this diagram, we can see the causes of the decrease in forest cover, such as natural disasters, unsustainable land conversion, and deforestation. And through the master plan, we formulated the forest ecosystem restoration through the adapted forest restoration program with specific projects such as conservation farming village, conservation forest village, soil and water conservation, and forest protection project. Actually, SWC and forest protection project are existing active programs and projects by the DENR. Also, the conservation farming village and conservation forest village somehow in GP through the commodity of agroforestry and fruit trees na related na rin po sila. Next slide, please. Mamila. In this table, we can see the length of implementation of each project with indicative cost, with each corresponding indicative cost. For conservation farming village, for 15 years, a total amount of 174 million plus. For conservation forest village, an indicative cost of 202 million. For soil and conservation, 80 million. And for forest protection project, total estimate of 145 million. Implementable for 1 to 15 years. Next slide, please. And water resources management. Next slide. Please show the diagram of solution 3. Mamila. Thank you. To improve the water quality, programs such as Water Supply Development Program, Water Demand Management Program were identified through the master plan. And specific activities such as establishment of rainwater harvesting system, installation of deep wells, construction of new irrigation system, and bulk water supply project, and improvement of irrigation water management for farms, and IEC campaign on water conservation. On water quality monitoring and management, DENR 8 have initially installed some instruments in Ormoc, Haro, Tanawan, and Palo. We installed water quality monitoring systems, water level monitoring systems, and automated weather system. As currently, the data for those instruments are accessible, wherein the barangays and LGUs where we have coordinated were given the access, and through cloud application, they can access directly the gathered and produced data daily by those instruments. Next slide. Next slide, please. Third thematic area is the wetland management. In wetland management, improper use of wetlands cause the degradation of water quality, exposure of wetland areas to various natural calamities, conversion of wetland areas to other land use, and riverbank erosion. In the diagram, we can see the projects identified. In strengthen protection, identified projects are biodiversity and ecological assessment of wetland areas, which is conducted by IIRR, harmonized wetland conservation strategy, wetland protection area. And in wetland restoration, we have wetland restoration project. And lastly, the integrated coastal management and protection project in the coastal areas of Cluster 5 River Basin, which runs from Palo, part of Tacloban, Tanawan, Tolosa, Dulag, Javier, including yes, part of Abuyog. Next slide, please. In this table, we have the indicative cost by each program and implementable for 15 years. Once we have started the project, the total sum for those projects is 2.4 billion. Next slide. For disaster risk reduction management, we have identified projects such as strengthen relocation project, capacity development on DRR and CCA, improvement of key government infrastructures, flood control project, and slope stabilization projects. For all we know, DRR is caused by insufficient climate resilient evacuation centers and DRR facilities, poor urban planning, weak implementation of DRR plans, and decrease in forest cover. This thematic area was strengthened after Typhoon Haiyan. Next slide. Again, the indicative cost for each project has a sum of 6.4 billion, implementable for 1 to 15 years. The strengthened location project has an estimated cost of 750 million, capacity development project of 1,900,000, flood control project about 2.2 billion, slope stabilization and 2 billion again, and improvement of key government infrastructures about 1 billion. Next slide. Economic development, we have the diagram. We have this diagram. Causes for poverty are reliant to natural-based dependent livelihood, insufficient value adding of natural resources being utilized, low agricultural production, insufficient livelihood opportunities, and population growth. And we have the identified projects. Establishment, improvement of agricultural trade center, which should be located in the accessible areas such as municipalities located wherein the access from the farms and upland barangays is easy. Community-based ecotourism project, cottage-based enterprise development, climate resilient agricultural project, and sustainable fisheries project. Next slide. The total indicative cost for these projects is 735 million. And only the sustainable fisheries projects is implementable for 1 to 8 years with a cost of 80 million. While the others is implementable for 15 years, each for climate resilient agricultural project has an indicative cost of 150 million. Cottage-based enterprise development has an indicative cost of 180 million, community-based ecotourism project with 225 million, and establishment of improvement of agricultural trade center for 100 million. Community-based ecotourism projects can be established in areas such as, example, in the Leyte Sab-a Peatland. Also, we can improve the community-based project, ecotourism projects in our PAs located in Cluster 5 River Basin. We have two protected areas in Cluster 5 River Basin, namely Lake Danao Natural Park and Mahagnaw Volcano Natural Park, located in Ormoc and Burawin, respectively. Next slide. For institutional development, we have the diagram. We have this diagram, and the main problem is the inefficient delivery of public services for conserving watersheds. And the identified projects are for watershed monitoring program. We have watershed instrumentation, comprehensive natural assessment and monitoring, RBMS and MIS. And for the creation of River Basin Coordinating Council, we have induced River Basin Coordinating Council formation and established of River Basin Office. For induced River Basin Coordinating Council formation, as suggested by the stakeholders, we have to create a management council by major river basin, our major watershed. For Binhaan watershed, we have already an existing management council. And for Palo and Dagitan Marabong, we still have a big work ahead to create a management council for each watershed, so that also including to represent the four minor watersheds, so that eventually we can create a river basin management council. And the other programs are projects are strict implementation of zoning ordinances, wherein we have from DENR, we have policies. All we need is to implement. From LGUs, all we have to do is to implement strictly all those ordinances. Capacity development interventions, mainstreaming of DRR and CCA in local development plans, sustainable financing mechanism, feasibility assessment of the implementation of Cluster 5 Master Plan, which is very important, caravan and road show project, gender equity and social inclusion project, and development of curricula for deaf ed and community ed. Next slide. In this slide, we have the all investment plan presented in a pie. Garnering 45%, we have the color orange, forest ecosystem and biodiversity management, equivalent to 600. Oh, no, I'm sorry. This is for water, equivalent to 8 billion. Followed by 12% wetland with about 2 billion. And we have the 34% from DRR, about 6 billion. And with the smallest allocation, the forest ecosystem and biodiversity with 602 million. And we have 2% for the economic cross-cutting, followed by forest ecosystem and then the economic development. Next slide. Next slide, please, Mamila. For the investment plans, for the short-term projects, we have an indicative cost of 3.4 billion. For the midterm projects, from 4 to 7 years, about 5.4 billion is the estimated cost of all those projects. And for the long-term projects, for 8 to 15 years, about 10 billion is the sum for those projects. Next slide. In this diagram, previous ma'am, the proposed River Basin Management Council. Previous slide, Mamila. Okay. This diagram shows the proposed River Basin Management Council. As I have discussed earlier, representing the major watersheds and those 4 minor watersheds. This diagram is supposedly the structure for the management council for the river basin. The river basin of cluster 5. Next slide. Previous slide, Mamila. Here we have the composition of the council. The chairman is usually the governor, and the vice chaired by the DENR Regional Executive Director, and the secretary is the RBCO, membered by the mayors, business sector, non-government organizations, NCIP, Armed Forces, PNP, DA, DPWH, NEDA, and sectoral representatives. Hopefully, in the succeeding years, we can create a management council for Cluster 5 River Basin. As of now, we are just starting to popularize the master plan, and for the stakeholders, LGUs, NGOs, NGAs, to be informed and to be aware that we have this master plan, and for those projects that should be aligned with the identified programs, projects, and activities within the master plan of Cluster 5 River Basin. Next slide. Previous slide, Mamila. We have the vision and mission for Cluster 5 River Basin. The vision and mission was formulated by the respective stakeholders who attended religiously. For the past 2 years, the dialogues, consultations, meetings that we facilitated. The vision is a healthy watershed that sustains all life forms and well managed by empowered, well-informed, united, and disaster-resilient stakeholders. And the mission goes to promote sustainable watershed management by capacitating local communities, increasing their awareness, improving resiliency, and reducing climate change impacts and risks. That would be the end of my presentation. And Sir Judah, thank you.
Damong salamat, Vic.
Thank you,
Before
Sir
we
Judah.
go on thank you. Before we go on a 5-minute break, we only have one question here raised by my colleague Arne Jansen. One question, Vic. What are the ingredients of the wetland restoration budget expenditures?
Wetlands.
And how to this wetland protection operation as part of flood control measures? Arne says that this is an important issue, especially in the Binhaan watershed.
Yes, sir. Wetlands.
So maybe Mila, you can show the table for wetland management. Go ahead, Vic.
Sandali sir, saglit lang. Wetlands. Pardon sir, pakiulit po yung ng tanong sir. For wetland management. Sir Judah.
The question, Vic, is what are the key ingredients of wetland restoration in the budget expenditures, and how do you propose to use wetland protection and restoration as part of flood control measures?
Yes. We can use the green infra, which is implemented by DENR. We can, for flood control, we can use bamboo at the river banks, to be planted at the river banks. And also we have the other for coastal activities. We have activities such as to perform satellite-based resource mapping and monitoring of wetland areas, conduct biodiversity assessment in identified wetlands,
Okay, so Vic, you're basically referring to nature-based solutions, right?
Yes, sir. Green infrastructure, okay. Sir.
Okay, that's good. Any other questions? We are a bit behind in terms of schedule. We can go on a 2-minute water break. If anyone wants to go, just don't leave the meeting room, please. And please be back in 2 minutes, if that's okay. Everyone, can you please press your thumbs up in reactions, if that's okay with you? Thank you. So please be back by 10:17. Thank you, Annadel and Zandel, for
Thank
your
you,
response.
Sir
Please be
Judah.
back by
Thank you.
10:17. Salamat, Vic. Salamat, Vic.
Thank you, sir.
Stay put.
Thank you
There
for the
might be other
opportunity.
questions later on.
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
I need to.
Please be back by 10:17. Okay, it's now 10:17 by my clock. I hope everyone's had a quick stretch or a water break. Our next presentation is going to be led by our facilitated by our main resource person. And this is the meat of our webinar today, to discuss with us the REV-IEW and business planning is Mila Mercado Bunker, and this will be followed by a Q&A portion. Mila, please go ahead.
Good morning to everyone. Good morning to everyone. I will just be a very short presentation because it's supposed to be a workshop, but at least reflecting from the 3 presentations for this morning, I'd like to really bring you in to one of the aspects of the river basin in Leyte, which is the economic development and how the programs and other programs can be sustainable. So I'm going to present different forms of business planning by which it's anchored on the programs. Am I clear in speaking? Can you hear me? Can you hear me? Okay, so thank you. So I'd like to look at the question, with all the challenges presented, where do we begin? So in other words, this is a question for all of us, looking at all projects. I'm sure there are projects that had already been approved, the enormous amounts that is involved in the next 15 years of the River Basin project in Leyte. So with all of these challenges, where do we begin? So I'd like to pose some questions which are very important for us. What are the key messages of business planning? From the word business comes what comes in mind. So, and why do we need business plan? So in other words, from the word business, it should have a return of investment. And it should have, why do we need that? So in other words, these are questions that comes to mind. Why do we need to have business planning in an environment project? And I think this is very important to have the return of our investment. So I would like later on to focus on the key indicators that was presented to us, that there are people who are willing to pay for our services, and there are 80% that is willing to pay for any endeavor on a river basin project. And I think this is a very important indicator to take away from the presentation this morning. So, so I'd like to present three models in business planning. SWOT analysis, strength, weaknesses, opportunities, and threat. And then REVIW, which I have developed through the years of conducting workshops on business planning with civil society and NGOs. And the recent one is Business Model Canvas, where I conduct through Go Negosyo Center with the DTI for all the entrepreneurs in the region. So this is actually in the Business Model Canvas for social enterprises and for cooperatives and entrepreneurs, which will now focus on the economic development based on the master plan. But I'd like to usher in just a quick review of business planning models. So first, we look at the SWOT, leading to TOAS and leading to SMART. So I'd like to have, of course, everybody knows strength, weaknesses, opportunities, and threat. So in other words, internal weakness. And I think the River Basin project for Tacloban has to also reflect which is the internal, who are the stakeholders in this project. And I think it was presented to us different stakeholders in the would-be to set up the management council. And I think these are referring to the internal capacity of each stakeholder in the project. And of course, opportunities and threat. And I'm very happy with the trajectory of wetlands in looking at resilience as the main trajectory. And these are opportunity and also, of course, threat. Opportunity, which is the PS that will be presented on different interventions. So after looking at the SWOT, the next level is TOAS. This is looking at the threat as a primary mover to motivate us to develop opportunity and to motivate us to put in our internal weakness into opportunity and our internal threat to strength. So in other words, looking at TOAS and coming up with SMART goals, specific, measurable, action-oriented, realistic, and time-bound. And these are very important, not to overwhelm us with the big amounts of money, but looking at small steps to leading to big steps. And these are very important in this particular model of SWOT analysis. That would lead to TOAS, that will lead us to make a SMART goal. So I don't know with the River Basin project, what type of intervention in the business planning or models are we going to use to look into the business plan in the next 4 years. The next one is the review. This is very important. And this process is used for a midterm evaluation or plan that needs revision and updating. With the COVID-19 and the pandemic, all organizations, be it IGO, international NGO, be it NGO, be it private sector, corporate sector, are now using this approach. Now, what is review? REVIEW process. This is very important to revisit. What are the achievements since the start of the, for Tacloban, for Leyte, a River Basin project, was their achievements. And I think major achievement is to conduct a study, an update of what happened. And in revisiting this, what are the recommendations that already been approved? In the case of Cagayan de Oro, they have a 10-year milestones that we revisited We used this approach in the Cagayan de Oro River Basin review last 2 weeks ago, that we revisited their milestones. And then we evaluated what are the lessons learned from that particular milestones. And these are very, very important. That will be a springboard and validated information. These are the outputs that already information gathered and assessed, and look at the baseline figures. What is very important in review is to establish already a baseline indicator where we will begin. And part of this is to look at the insight and key messages from that revisitation, that evaluation, that validation, that will move us to envisioning. Again, look at the trend analysis, look at the forecast and future, and establish key priorities. And these are very important processes. And if we see each other, we use meta cards for all of this. These are different colors of meta cards that we will use to validate. And this will bring us to a very, very concrete, realistic, and time-bound particular priorities, because we need to call out from the master plan one of the things that are very important to prioritize. So I'm challenging Leyte, what among all the thematic approach are we going to prioritize? I think later on, as we wrap up this webinar, I'd like to challenge the group that are here. What do you think should be our priority in the review process? And I think right now we are revisiting. In this webinar, we are revisiting, we are evaluating, we are validating, but it should lead us to insight and envisioning. So I would challenge you as we wrap up to look at the insight, to envision what are the key priorities for the river basin in Leyte and Cluster 5. And these are very important for us to think about as we end today. I'd like to challenge all of us, at least we have at least three key priorities that we'll wrap up at the end of the workshop. I'll come back to you to look at this in a little while. Now, I'd like the third one is a business model canvas. We call it BMC. This has already been the best practice in looking at business model as a strategic management and lean startup template in developing new or documenting existing business models. It is visual chart as a canvas with elements describing a business, a product, or a project. And this is very, very important. Even DTI in their Mentor Me KMME program, we are using this for all the entrepreneurs to present the business model canvas. And I'm very, very happy that I know Hailey will share their business model canvas in one of her presentation today. This is what is business model canvas. This is to allow a simple presentation of information, reducing complication in an understanding of what is required, which is a model, which is the model focuses on value proposition, infrastructure, customers, and finances. It gives you a business plan in a snapshot. And this is a workshop that I'm going to challenge you. And I know Hailey will share their pitch in her presentation today. This is very important that in one shot, like this a while ago, Vic presented, I think about 30 slides of all the master plan. In a business model canvas, you can see it in one glance, that you can already see the business plan. And it looks like this. This is a model that you can see the model that is going on in one canvas. And it starts with the market. And the market, these are three indicators in the market. Customer relationship, which are the targeted clients and our relationship with them. How do we bring our services at their doorsteps? The channels, the way, the method by which we bring our services to them. These are distribution channels. And these are vehicles that can bring them there. And of course, the customer segments. These are the segments of which part are we going to target. These are classification of our market. And this is very important for us to realize who will be our target market. And I think with the integrated river basin project, there are several targeted groups that we can look at using the business model canvas. And I feel, though it says business, it pertains to return of investment. That all the grants, all the project money will not turn into waste, but will have a return, be it in qualitative or be it in quantitative parlance. No? So what is important also in a business model canvas is the value proposition and operation. The center of business model canvas is the value proposition. When you say river basin in Leyte Cluster 5, what do you think would bring into mind? And I think one of the outstanding in my listening today is how do we clean the rivers? And in our mind are clean rivers. And out of the, because there are different competitive advantage and in each of the river basin already that I have been oriented in all of this presentation, there's something that is of value that once Leyte is mentioned or the river basin cluster 5 mentioned, then you know already your value proposition. And this will encourage partnerships of other sectors in the government because there is something worth in partnership. And I think one of the takeaway in the first presentation is that there should be a private-public partnership in this project. And what is our value proposition? And the next part is the operation, which have key indicators. Of course, we have the partners. This is the very easy part. All master plan have this. Key activities and key resources. How much is the value of this project? This is in one business model canvas. And the last part of the business model canvas is the financials. So in other words, the cost structure and the revenue streams. Now, in most projects, we have all the costs, but the question is, what is the revenue? So in a different mind setting now, we will look at the revenue streams. Where do we get the revenues? And in business, of course, these are sales. But revenues here, which will be talked about by Hailey in the next presentation, are investment. In a business model canvas, we don't look at just income that is coming in out of sale of a product. These are investment that are infused in a project. And so in a business model canvas, you look at your revenue streams. It's not just income streams. This is one of just a component of the business model canvas. So I'd like to really look at this in terms of investments that are put in the river basin that have return and the cost structures that at the end of the day will not put to waste because it has been structuralized. And I'd like to show you, maybe I'm just talking about theory here, but I'd like to show you all the interrelationship. If you look at the arrows, everything is interrelated in a canvas. And in the revenue streams, these are, later on we'll talk about it. But I'd like to present to you a key message between master plan and business model canvas. Everybody say, we have a master plan. We already have 10, 15-year master plan. But I would like to ask you the difference between master plan and business model canvas. Master plan has the component that are divided into thematic approach based on strategic direction as described to us by VIII. It describes activities and budgets per those activities. And master plan is just one component of business model canvas. That's why key activities under operation and cost structure under financial system is mentioned. So in other words, the plan revolves around the profitability of the fund allocated, but it's not sustainable when the allocation stops. So in other words, the funds are called of course in fund management as budget allocation. But in business model canvas, I would say that it has 9 components divided into 3 major elements in a business plan: market, operations, financials. Of course, in one canvas. So I'm going to challenge in one shot, you can look at the activities involved. So in a one canvas. That's why I was just training one federation this week on business model. They have different models, cooperative, this is cooperative. They have, this is redeeming the environment by creating agro-based business like muscovado, cacao. These are different business line, and each of the business line has business model. And they put budget. They really are still thinking about fund allocation. And I said, the best practice is business model canvas. How would you say that I'm going to invest in muscovado more than cacao? And how would I say that the project of cocoa sugar, which is also an alternative, is better than cacao? These are very important in the key operations and market, in channels, customer relationship, and segments. So you can present it in different forms like pie graph or bar graph. So this is a new way in presenting business called with a pitch. I would say pitch is very important. Competitive advantage. How am I different from other river basin projects? So it continues because the business proposition is attractive, or the value proposition is attractive to investor. So funds are called investment. It's not just grants. And stakeholders supports the value proposition. And I know we will enjoy the presentation highly because there are already attraction to investment with the PS that she will present. These are very important to take away in two. The business model canvas and master plan. Master plan is just a component of business model canvas. And I think in the business planning trajectory, this has to be considered. And my question on the next slide, how is it translated in the program? So I'd like to look at the systems of life for a tree. Of course, in the business model, you look at the tree and how it has to bear fruit. So in other words, the roots are all the key activities that contributes to the success of the program. And the sap flows through the branches, and these are the activities that flows through the branches. And of course, these are important to look at your value proposition in terms of what kind of difference are we going to implement in the River Basin project. And these are, of course, there are partnerships that you need to do to put in your programs. And this is all the key partners and all the other ingredients that will produce a fruitful tree. But of course, the value proposition are its fruit. So in other words, these are outstanding. When you look at Leyte, you have something in your mind. What is the difference and competitive edge of Leyte that is different from other river basin program in other parts of the Philippines? So these are some things that are presented in a business model canvas, the value proposition. And these are all the others are the nine components of a business model canvas. Now, the systems of life for an enterprise, of course, has infrastructure. These are the operations that are also processing in a business model canvas. You need people, you need systems, and you need also channels that needs to be put in a canvas. And these are also practical approaches to carrying out your proposition. Okay, so from the soil, supply chain, raw materials, that's why in each of the project, it has a supply and demand chain. So these are very economics that needs to be put in a canvas. So in other words, these are the SAP flows, the operations, procedures, activities, and the accounts. It's the financials. And of course, the CO2 is from the sun, that are customers, income, and satisfaction from the value proposition. So these are one way of presenting the business model canvas. This is the system that needs to be put together in a business model canvas. Okay, now to complete the canvas is to take away the final step in a business model canvas, and that's financials. If you look at the financials, these are arrows that goes into the activities. These are market that generates revenues. These are investment that generates revenues. And there are green arrows that goes inside the flow, which are the inflows. Now, one of the things that is very, very important is a cash flow projection approach in a business model canvas. That's why back to back with the business planning is the financial projections. And this is what I'm very, very pleased with Cabanban or River Basin. We were able to come up with a cash flow projection for the next 4 years. And then these are important that we were able to put together through the technical working groups and through the project management office. And you see the red lines, these are risks, risk approaches. This is risk-based projection because there are a lot of risk in a business model, and you have to also account this risk. These are financial risk, environment risk. These are risk of not being able. These are reserve fund that needs to be inputted in the cash flow based approach projections. And these are all things that comes in the form of investment, goes out into your activities, but also there are contingencies that needs to be inputted in the cash flow. That's why I put the cash flow in the business model canvas. And this is how we will concretize the business plan. Okay, the last slide, I think, is just using cash flow based projection in CDO River Basin plan. So I'm going to show you the output of the project. Though it is still a draft, I need to clean up because I need their financial plan, financial statement. So, but these are some of the rough things that I consolidated. Now, the inflow based on 2021 to 2024 and per year. So they have grants. And what is very important in a business model canvas is the revenue streams. They already inputted their best payment for ecosystems in the revenue streams. And this is the new way of looking at grants and project management fee. So in the next 4 years, they will be able to look at 45% are already coming from only from their international grants, and the 46% is from local grants is 45, and the orange one is 46% from the international. But they are already inputting some of the revenues coming from the project management fee. It's inflow. It's not just income. It's what you put as a cash to the project. And the revenue streams per year, looking at each year, these are the revenues they would generate on a per year, and look at the increasing trend in the revenue streams per year. And this is very important, looking at, maybe you are always looking at project-based grant component and all, but these are important in a business canvas, that you look at your financial as all your inflows as your revenue streams. And then the next one is your outflow. Now in the cash flow, which there are 3 components: investing activity, financing activities, and operating activities. Of course, financing are borrowings. You need to borrow to be able to generate. But of course, understandably, they have no plans of borrowing money. That's why they have no financing. All of these are operating activities, and investments are all the physical asset that you're going to, all the infrastructure that needs to be put in place in the next 4 years. So in other words, this is the allocation that is already in place. And of course, this is project-based. All their activities are put in there, and their costs are program costs, operating costs, and personnel costs. These are very important. Of course, this is very important that you put in personnel costs. They have to project, are these people consultants? Are these people, how many people are regular or project-based? These are to be put in different allocation. And mind you, I enjoyed, now all technical working group are really, really working very hard towards their specific allocation for technical working group. And I think later on, I would like to challenge which come first, the organization of technical working group. Hopefully there will be technical working group I will show you the technical working group and their allocation on this. This is the cost structure. I'd like to end by the fund requirement. This is the bottom line. How much fund would I need in the next 4 years? So this is fund requirement per technical working group, and what is their share in the whole funding for Cagayan de Oro River Basin. The project management office has 45% in the total fund that they need. Next is the resource management technical working group. They share 31%. Governance, they have 17%. Community development and PS 1%. Media and communication is 6%. This is rough. And their fund requirement up to the per year, they begin with year 1, year 2, year 3, and it's actually a lessening in terms of their fund requirement per year because they begin to put in the payment for ecosystem. They are willing to pay. And I think very important, those who are willing to pay, we can put it in the inflow and we can input this in figures. And that's why I was saying to Dr. Annadel that we're willing to help in terms of looking at fund requirement of the river basin of Leyte, and Cluster 5 is in the next days to come. So I think that ends my presentation because I have only very few minutes, but these are the presentation of the different model canvas. And in the model canvas, the bottom line is look at your fund requirement that we need to generate in the next 4 years. So that ends my presentation. If you have some question, I will be happy to address them.
Okay, thanks, Mila. Are there any questions? From our participants, please. I don't see anyone raising their hands.
Okay.
So maybe while people are still thinking about their questions, if it's okay with you, let us move on to the next presentation by Dr. Hailian Kiao, which Mila earlier mentioned. She's very excited about, and I'm sure all the other participants are keen to hear about it. So let's hear now from the Cagayan de Oro River approach to financing and investments. Hailey, go ahead.
Hi, mayong buntag sa tanan, magandang umaga. Thank you for inviting us to present our work in Northern Mindanao. And it's good to know that so many also major achievements and activities have been done in your area. But I've been doing in terms of an ecosystem-based approach to management and using ecological services as sort of the angle of focus to get these investments and support to finance the activities. So I will be coming in from a perspective of a coastal alliance and a river basin alliance, and we will tell you there are actually many similarities of what we're doing and what you have already started doing. So Dr. Juliet mentioned this, but I just wanted to reiterate that for over a decade, it took us quite a while to get the many people on board, especially these investors. And we finally came up with a good sort of a currency, which we call as ecosystem services. Yeah. And just to go over, since this has been mentioned already earlier by Dr. Juliet, these are the direct and indirect contributions we get from the environment, which is very much important for our survival. And it was difficult to drive this concept across, and I will show you infographics we made. So the water that you get from your faucet, you actually pay the water service provider for the infrastructure, the facilities to pump the water from the ground directly to your households. What we don't see is that this water coming from the faucet is not actually coming from the service provider, but actually coming from the environment, because this water is infiltrated from the vegetation upland or a watershed, which is then part of the supply of the, what you call it, the groundwater. So this is the point that we wanted all the people to understand, that when you talk about ecosystem services, yeah, you should think of the environment as the one providing all this source. So in our case, we have, as mentioned earlier by Dr. Juliet, we have sort of identified already what these 4 ecosystem services are. Let me just go through it. One is the provisioning services, and we are the food basket in Mindanao. So we have so many provisions. Second is that we also have these supporting services that are not visible to us, but very much important for the production of these other ecosystem services, like nutrient cycling, photosynthesis. Another, which is very much integral to Mindanao, is the cultural service, especially that we are tribe people here. We have our brothers and sisters in the Muslim faith, our indigenous groups, and other settlers, the Christians mostly. So, and we have also development of ecotourism in other areas. So this is a service that is new and has not been really explored. The last ecological service that we're focusing on is what we call as the regulating service. And this is where we emphasize. And this is in relation again to disaster. And in our case, for example, we are focusing on the prevention of erosion and flooding in ano. So with these 4 ecological services, I will show you what will happen if the flow of these ecosystem services are disrupted, and then it causes disaster. But in our case, it's an integrated disaster aspect. And let me fly you down to northern Mindanao. This is our coastal area called Macahalar Bay, and it's connected to one of the river basins called the CDO River Basin. So when we started working on environmental governance in the coast, I'm a marine biologist by profession, and we showed to the mayors that actually, based on an oceanographic study, the seeds or the similia coming from one municipality in the east, for example, is actually supplying the reef areas in the western LGU. Or in some cases with Habagat or Amihan, the flow will change. So it's not fair for one local coastal LGU to be putting too much effort on restoration when the benefits are the other LGUs. So this was a bestseller for us to create the Macahalar Bay Development Alliance, and this was in 2009, so we're like more than 10 years already. But then we realized that even if we do all this work, the bay is very much affected. Yeah, okay pa. Yeah. So with the creation of the alliance, so we have all the 13 local government units in the province of Misor working together, and we operate through technical working groups. But then we realized that whatever we do in the coast, we still have to work upland. We have to go up because the bay is very much fed with sediments coming from the upland. So in our case, the CDO River Basin has 2 main headwaters. It's called Kitanglad and Palatungan. And we have the perfect recipe for disaster because it's very steep. And it's also barren. Yeah, there's an expansion of agriculture as well. So with the changing climate where we have intense rains, then we are affected with the flooding as well. And this load of sediments coming in from the upland, going through the rivers that will eventually go into our coast. And in this case, you see the plume of these rivers coming from the river basins, the upland, which will affect eventually our coastal ecosystems. What used to be a thriving coral reef is now a barren reef. So the provisioning service and even the regulating service of the corals and the mangroves are not as healthy as before. So one of the major cause that we really go into this is the very bad incident of flooding we experienced in 2011 called Sendong, and which we still experience now and then. And this is what we're focusing on, the regulation eventually of disaster through flooding. Another reason why we are focusing on ecosystem services is that as early as 2007, we have been identified already as a water stress city. And in fact, many of our water pumps have already been studied to be decreasing in terms of the level of water to pump. So we have two sources of disaster, the erosion and flooding, and also water insecurity. So in 2009, another group came together called the CDO River Basin Management Council. And what makes us different in this way is that we have the key national government agencies through their regional offices to be the co-chairs. So we have DNR, DILG, and DA. And in particular, we have the Cagayan de Oro City sitting in because it's the area where most of the impact are coming from the river basin. And this multi-sectoral gathering was initiated not just by DNR, but our Archdiocese of Cagayan de Oro, called the Cagayan de Oro River, the Archdiocese of Cagayan de Oro by Bishop Ledesma. So with these two management councils now, we are also working with the adjacent river basin, Taguluan River Basin, because as mentioned, we are one big ecosystem base geographically, and we need to work together. But apart from this, as mentioned, we are also working beyond us, and we have, I'm flying you now to Caraga, and here working with wetlands, we are working with Agusan River Basin, and in the Proud of My Porok project a few years ago. And here we identified the role of the marsh as its ecosystem service to supposedly be the catchment of water coming from the different areas of the Agusan River Basin. But in this case, all the sediments coming in from the different areas have increased the sediment load and made the marsh shallow, such that it doesn't work anymore as a water storage. So these are examples that we're doing in terms of using a systems approach, a different lens in terms of environmental management. So we focus now on PS, protecting all these ecosystem services. And in this case, we actually base it on a simple premise where we use the one from River Basin Central Office, that if you have more vegetation upland, you have more water that will infiltrate into the ground to provide water supply, but also less flooding going downstream and also less soil. But to do this, you need money, yeah? And so in our case, we did what we call as a landscape investment. And in our case, we've been supported by the International Union for the Conservation of Nature in Netherlands for over a decade now. And one of the tools that they have helped us is identifying this landscape investment. And here you see a whole ecosystem, and you see the roles of each sub-ecosystem, or you call it a group. For example, the forests that you see here are actually providing this microclimate that is down to the city, for example. Or this, for example, this business are providing all these jobs and markets for the people, for their livelihood. And here you have the connection of the area to the global in terms of consumers and market. And you have the rural-urban linkage. So all this, you look at it at the whole landscape and see where we can then tap in terms of supporting these ecological services. So the landscape investment fund approach is basically to show you that there are actually financiers available in your area, but you need a certain body that will facilitate all this. So like a funnel here, and then to channel all these funds to where you want in terms of priority for your objectives in your area. So let me then go through what we did in our case. We had this, it's called LIFT. So there's actually a tool on this, and we've done this already here in some areas of our project under the Green Livelihood Alliance of Netherlands. And here, we also did this, the business canvas that Mila was mentioning earlier. So we have done this, we're finished with that. And so the output is that we have identified all these investors and we have reached out to them. So in our case, the funnel is being controlled by us in the council, and all these investors, you can call it, are here, and we have already identified priority areas. So let me just go through each. First is that we really realize the importance of the LGU, because no matter what you do, the LGU is the one with jurisdiction over the environment. So in our case, remember, it took us a very bad incident with Sendong for all these LGUs to come together, although we have come together before that, but it was the push. And here again, to show you an animation that Cagayan de Oro on itself cannot work on the environment because it has to go upland and work with the other 3 municipalities. So this concept was accepted, and so we had MOA, facilitated by our co-chair, the ILG, where after Sendong, there was an inter-LGU disaster risk reduction management, where each of the LGU has to contribute in terms of restoring the environment as one of the stipulations. So in our case, for example, like one of the upland municipalities just this year, they have allocated an amount to restore one of the headwaters I've mentioned, Palatungan. The rest of the LGUs have contributed actually for this year, but these were all diverted to COVID funds, which is also an emergency need. But apart from the MOA, is that we have already worked on the LGUs in terms of what we call as the Peat. It was mentioned earlier that this ecosystem is called payment. But the word payment is not very attractive, actually. It turns off some because you have to pay. So what we did is we sort of tweak it a bit to still PES, but more protecting ecosystem services. But in the LGUs that we have worked on is that here we were able to lobby with the council and other sectors to push for all these LGUs to come up with their ordinances. So in this case, for example, one of the LGUs will focus on adding water tariff to protect the other headwaters that we mentioned, and the IPs that are working in this ancestral domain. Another one is the another upland municipalities, where they will focus on rehabilitating the other headwater, which is called Mount Kitanglad. And here, with the chartered city of Cagayan, this is new because instead of adding, imposing the payments for environmental services to the community, after 4 or 6 years of lobbying with the city, they have decided to shoulder that cost, and they have allocated 10 million a year for environmental restoration. And this was last year, and we're just working on how to implement this. So this is a landmark ordinance. So apart from the LGUs, is as mentioned earlier, I think by Mila, that we also tap institutional investors and foundation. And I know Forest Foundation is also working in your case. So this is what I mean. You're actually doing it. It's just a matter of compiling it all. So in our case, we have support from IUCN, not just on restoration, but on other aspects. But just to show you that we have a model where we develop under this fund. And here we went down to the point of costing, how much to restore a hectare of area in the riparian buffer, so that it's easy for us to work with other investors and to provide the come-on. Another project mentioned earlier by Dr. Annadel is the one with the VEII. It's a Sustainable Water Fund of Netherlands. And here, this is new for them because instead of using infrastructure for disaster risk management on addressing water supply, they have recognized the role also of soft engineering in terms of restoration because the water is being supplied from the environment. So here, our model is called Kauyagan by a business sector Unifuti group through their Hiniliban Foundation. And here, it's also an intercropping of cash crops, no? And the use of a species called Calyandra. So apart from that, we're now working with our business sector. And in this case, we have a champion, as mentioned here earlier by Unifruti. So apart from the model that I've shown you earlier, as early as a decade ago, they have worked on providing a sort of financial support to the ancestral domain groups that where they plant the pineapples and banana, because they also realized without that they could not have the production that they need. Another one, this is a bit unique. It's called the river basin approach, because here we have our sellers of the ecosystem services where I mentioned flooding and erosion, the ancestral groups of Milalitra, and the buyers are mostly from Cagayan de Oro, and we instituted a fund manager called the Xavier Science Foundation. We were also successful in getting our service, water service provider, COWD, and they are allocating 4 to 6 million a year for the rehabilitation of the watersheds where they are pumping. And here, another example of the PES of one LGU where we have arranged for it to be partnered by a local agri-industry called Dole in terms of provision of seedlings. So now we are going on tapping the banks by waiving their usual requirements, and they are working directly with the people's organization, either co-ops or associations, in providing loans for the restoration. And in this case, it's providing the 3 Ps, the profit by the intercropping of cash crops, and the P, the protection that will be provided, and the 3rd P, the people that will be provided with an alternative income, as well as us, the whole ecosystem, in terms of being protected. We still have a long way to go, very far, but here we have identified the priority high-risk areas that we wanted to focus and where these other sectors can come in. But if you look at the greens here, these are mostly the NGP sites and other restoration sites that we have mapped. So we still really have a long way to go. So let me end by saying that our value added is the restoration by intercropping of indigenous trees. And this is our target, for example, in an Abusan River Basin, to return back the endemic trees to all. So thank you and good morning. Back to Judah.
Many thanks, Dr. Kylie, for your presentation. I'm sure many of our participants in the webinar are excited to ask questions and comments to the 2 presentations. One on the 3 approaches to investment and finance, facilitated by Mila, and then your presentation, Dr. Kylie. So let's move on to the question and answer portion. Any questions, please?
Judah, there is one question here in the chat from from Ms. Corazon Macabenta. Maybe Doc Heidi can respond to this question. There are 2 protected areas included within the River Basin Cluster 5. We are at present updating the management plan of Lake Danao Natural Park in Ormoc and Mahagnao Volcano Natural Park in Buruyawan. As mentioned, community-based ecotourism projects included in the project with corresponding budget. May I ask if we can already include the sources of fund for this CBE project under River Basin?
Yes, yes. Actually, if you look at the landscape investment fund approach, it doesn't limit to those that we have shown. Actually, it's open to any financing source that you can find. So yes, it's good that you have identified that already, and to continue pursuing that so they can really support some of the activities of the master plan. If you look at the whole master plans all around the country, there are so many activities that you need to fund. So a diversification of the funding sources is also encouraged. And the role of the tool is to basically identify what these are. So yes, ma'am, correct. You can use that.
Thank you for that clarification regarding Cora's question. I see that Dane Anasio has a question. Dane, you can and ask the question.
Thank you,
Dane,
sir.
go ahead.
All right. Thank you very much. I was very inspired by the model presented by Doc Hailey. So in the long run, would this model of multinational corporations buying the produce of these IP groups would be a sustainable or unsustainable model in the long run? Just your thoughts. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah, it's a very interesting question. Let me just, I won't directly answer yet, but our stand here is we're trying not to be a pure environmentalist, not also a pure combative. It's more on dialogue. And we were thinking like these industries are here to stay. So we're trying to look for a balancing act between economic development and also environmental protection. So in this case, for example, in these companies, and for those who are not aware, we have Dole and Del Monte, so really big agro-industrial groups. We could not just totally stop them because they are here. So they're also providing income. So what we're pushing for them is to bring them on board in terms of partnering either, in this case, like in the PS. So for the case of Unifruti, for example, their PES modality is that they actually realize that their production, their whole supply chain or their whole business chain is very much dependent on the land that they're using, which is owned by the ancestral groups. So the dependence now is with the multinational groups to the ancestral domains. So it's the other way around. But in terms of buying the produce from the certain IP group in another model, for example, like the one I mentioned with Milalitra, where they produce coffee and cacao, it actually, the pitch that was mentioned earlier by Mila, it actually has a bigger market because, for example, we were saying like a gram of coffee is equivalent to a gram of soil that is being preserved. So it's all about marketing as well. So I hope I answered in terms of providing you these two angles coming from the business and the IP sellers as well.
Dane?
Thank you.
Okay, so Dane gives us a thumbs up. So it's really a balancing act between negotiation, education, and coming up with trade-offs. In this case, they've been able to do that through dialogues and engagement with all the other stakeholders. So I guess in our case in Cluster 5, in Leyte and in Leyte Sab-a, these are good lessons that maybe we can take on board. Thank you, Dane, and thank you, Doc Hailey, for that clarification and response. Any other questions from our participants?
If none, I would like to add to the response of Dr. Hailey with the Unifruti Hinileban Foundation and Village Partnership we have under the Ridge to Coast Rain to Top project. The purchasing of the products from coffee, cacao, and adlai. Adlai is a grain that is very useful for reducing the sugar level in diabetics. So it's very costly in health products, health shops. This purchase of products is part of a module called the rainforestation. It's building on the value systems of the community. It's building a community garden, and then having this livelihood based on cacao, coffee, or adlai to make them able to have some money in their pockets. And then once they have money in their pockets and food on their table, they're more likely to participate in the restoration of the buffer zone that is denuded or the riverbanks that are denuded. So to answer your question, to also it's going to be sustainable because it's working with the community at these different aspects of life. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Annadel. My internet connection in Tacloban is getting unstable, so I get dropped off every now and then. Do we have other clarifications or questions from our participants here? You can ask questions in relation to Doc Hailey's presentation and also questions to Mila earlier.
While they are, Judah?
Yes, go
Yeah,
ahead.
yeah. While they are not questioning yet, and then Annadel can add to this. We are actually scaling up, leveling up the connections of the different river basin management councils in the Philippines. So if you saw, we are working now in our Region 10, and we wanted to have this like a network of river basin alliances in the country. So we're glad that RBCO is here. But this is actually with support of our Ridge to Coast project that Annadel mentioned. So all of our learnings will really go into this and will be passed on to other management councils. So Ma'am Cora, for example, if you need our help, we are willing to do that. But just to mention that on a bigger perspective, we have the plan to really create an alliance of all these management councils. Thank you.
Thank you for mentioning that, Doc Hailey. Indeed, I'd like to speak on the part of the Cluster 5 River Basin because Wetlands in Eastern Leyte has been working very closely with Vic and his team. That yes, last year we went to visit the Cagayan de Oro River Basin and the Agusan River Basin. We learned a lot from that, but as you see, based on Vic's presentation. We would very much like to learn how you operationalize the canvas approach that was discussed by Mila earlier. And I'm sure we've learned a lot more in terms of integrating science to governance and operationalization of the management council. We have a similar situation here in that cluster 5 or its waters that drain out of these clustered watersheds lead out to Leyte Gulf and San Pedro Bay, which is a major source of livelihood for our coastal community. So thank you for mentioning that, Doc Heidi.
Yeah.
I would just like to check if Dr. Tony Danyo is back before I hand over the floor back to Mila for the integration of this webinar.
Yeah, Dr.
Unless,
Dano
of
just came
course-
in.
Okay, Dr. Danyo is back. Before we start with Mila, may I request everyone to turn on our cameras because Riza would like to take a photo of everyone for documentation purposes.
Sir?
Ayan, inaayos na ni Riza yung kanyang hairdo.
Yes, sir.
So,
Yeah, let's
kindly turn on your cameras, everyone.
Sir Eugene, Dennis, Evsu. Yan, dalawang page tayo.
Juvi, Ma'am Cora, Joe,
Sino pa yan? Para kompleto,
si
sir.
Ma'am LV o Gebsu.
Jane also will take photo. Jane.
Si Dr. Tampus o
Si Ma'am
Annalyn.
Giselle sa NEDA 8.
Okay. Okay, 1, 2, dalawang page tayo po. 1, 2, smile. Okay, wait lang. Jay, nagtitake ka ng photo? Wait lang po. Wala na siya.
Wait lang at Larissa.
Oh, sige.
Ano ba? Ano ba? Take ang photo, dali.
Oo nga, si Eugene, parang pumayat si Eugene sa lockdown.
Di rin siya.
Wait lang po. Okay, next is 1, 2, 3, smile. Okay. Last one po.
Okay, turn on lahat ng video, please. Mila.
Na-turn on ba si Miss Mila? Okay, and last one.
Lahat ng video. Yeah.
1, 2, 3, smile. Thank you po. Good. We're done, Sir Judah.
Yeah.
Okay na po.
Okay.
Wala ako. So thank you. With that, I give the floor back to Mila for her integration. Mila.
Okay, so as far as I think many of our participants now are also looking at priorities. I posed one question in terms of the things that we need to do as a priority program. So I'd like to look into looking at what does River Basin top priority will be. And I'd like to process this with the audience because then I will summarize, because this is very important contribution of those participating now. So I'd like to throw the question as the wrap up. Among all the things that are presented to this, what do you think are the 3 key priority areas that the Cluster 5 would look into as a priority program? What is your recommendation? So in other words, there are 3 things that has been put on our table. One is protecting our protecting our environment, looking at the illegal programs, and then the other one is private-public partnership in terms of redeeming the river basin. So I think the engagement of those who attended today will be very important. So I would like to use the whiteboard because we have been sitting here listening, and I prefer not to use PowerPoint, but I'd like to put on the screen the priority program that you feel will be your takeaway for this webinar. So this is the floor for those who wanted to really look into and passionate about priority programs in the integrated river basin approach. So what do you think should be the priority? There are the several themes presented to us, like economic development, institutional development, disaster risk reduction program, resource management program. So what do you think is the priority?
Ma'am Mila, to get the ball rolling, I would like to take off my facilitator hat here. I think as Wetlands Eastern Leyte, and having participated in past consultations for Cluster 5, and also being part of the Leyte Sab-a Peatland, the biggest resource in terms of a supply and demand analogy is water resources. And water in the case of Cluster 5 is very similar to the analogy that Dr. Hailey and her team in Cagayan de Oro is using. Why is that so? The largest number of users, resource users, is for water. Water provides, supplies almost 100% of the water consumption needs of the population, not only in Leyte, but also special.
No, it was cut.
Again, but that was my point. Thank you.
Yeah. So you were saying about water. You were talking about yeah. So anyone from the group? I think from our there were actually I will just put in about public-private partnership. I think the first presenter was also looking at public-private partnership. Maybe what do you think is this? Is this a good anyone? And then there's one from Paulina. We said institutional development program. formalizing alliance. I think that's very nice. Institutional development program. Maybe if you like to speak, it would be nice for everybody to hear about it. Paulina?
Oh, yes. Good morning. And
Good
since
morning.
we're just talking about the river basin development in cluster 5 and cluster 6 last year, and only the master plan that was prepared by consultants from UP Las Baños has been presented. So there's no, there is not yet there was no talk about how are we going to work together. There were just broad strokes, and I think we are going to implement a program, and these are several programs. We should have formalized our ways of working together. So who is the technical working group? What are the roles? What will be the participation of the stakeholders? How are we going to work together? How are we going to contribute? Yeah, that should be something, because the challenge is broad. The challenge and the presentation of Hilian was overwhelming, and we also have to learn about business model, that business model approach, and that would be the work of the institution that has to be created and formalized.
Yeah. Thank you, Ma'am, because I wanted to take this up as a priority. Even what was very good in River Basin was they were able to really strengthen the alliances, particularly the technical working group, and they have defined roles. And I think this is very, very critical and very important. Thank you very much. I think this is very, very important as number one to work on. Thank you very much. That's also in part of my list that I'm going to share as a wrap up. Anyone from other, and then there's one engaging the stakeholders to really participate. I think there's one here that is also wants to really look at engaging the stakeholders. Yeah, economic program that will stake. This is from Annalyn Diocampo. Maybe you may want to really look at the important element. Maybe you need to elaborate. Sorry, because these are also what is in my list as a wrap up, and it's very nice. Can you share something?
Hello, ma'am.
Yes,
ma'am. Maybe I suggest that when there is economic program that would be enhanced in the river basin, the stakeholders should be the first one to know and what they will get from it, because they will really engage to that program if they have also some like money that they can get, that they can give to their families, I think.
Yeah. Yes, nice.
That's all, ma'am. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So anyone, at least we can have at least 5 takeaways that we can wrap up before we give the anyone, any more that you wanted to, yeah, and
yes,
somebody's talking.
Judah.
Yeah.
Yes, it's Judah. I think one difference in the characterization of the Leyte River Basin, and I'm trying to compare our situation here with Cagayan de Oro, is that if you look at the forest cover, we have very little forest cover left. And maybe that's the reason why in terms of cost, there's a comparatively very small budget for forest restoration. And I think that will impact on the number one component that I mentioned, because if you look at the experience of Cagayan de Oro, and I'm sure other river basins, the lesser forest cover and vegetation you have, the less capacity will your ecosystem be able to provide in terms of downstream ecosystem services. So I pose this more as a question.
Anyone who wants to interact? Yeah, it's also from Ivy, from Vic also, who was also sharing about forest ecosystem and biodiversity. Vic, you want to share something about this? You think it's also what you exactly mean?
Hello. Hello po, ma'am.
Yeah.
I choose that forest ecosystem and biodiversity since like water came not directly, water came from the forests, including the vegetation. Siyempre, dapat na hindi naman natin, though mandate ng DENR na protektahan talaga yung forest mismo at saka yung biodiversity. Dapat din na naman nating through the involvement of the stakeholders na ma-priority din natin. Dahil dito tayo nagkukuha ng mga resources na ginagamit natin sa pangaraw-araw. Example, yung tubig mismo.
Miss Mila? I also agree with Ivy and Sir Judah. The water resources management at the forest ecosystem and biodiversity has a very much high relation. So if you observe the consequences every time we have a typhoon season in Leyte, yung flooding na nangyayari palagi, especially in the Bangun River, ay because of the forest ecosystem and the biodiversity that have been degraded already, especially in the mountains of the area in Haro and Burawen. So that is why konting ulan lang, malaki na ang tubig na napupondo dito kaagad at the lower ground. So malaki yung relation ng you cannot just conserve and do management on the water if you will not also do some management interventions on the forest ecosystem and the biodiversity.
I think Mr. Perandos, I think you have something also related to this that you put on the chat box. Maybe it would be nice for everybody to hear what you're saying. You were saying about hydrologic water balance.
Hello.
So yes,
hello,
I think
ma'am.
you have a very good point here. Yeah.
I am speaking from also the consortium may also consider the perspective of the activities from the agroforestry, no? Such as in Leyte and Samar, no? The the conduct of water resource studies to evaluate feasibility to the identified potential new water supply source for specific purpose of plantation, like or agriculture or water bottling. You may also want to determine the capacity of the groundwater to provide water supply to the target users. This shall involve inventories like geological mapping, georesistivity surveys, pumping and yield tests, and modeling works. And then for lastly, you may want also to consider water demand projections, such as the projected domestic, institutional, and commercial consumptions, along with the natural resource amount, and determine the capacity needed from the sources. Yun lang, ma'am. Basically, geological and hydrological studies lang yun.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So any more that you want to take away from this webinar that we can wrap up? I'm putting still 5 so that we have 5 takeaway. So just really looking at the forest ecosystem and biodiversity, particularly in water, looking at public-private partnership, institutional development, which I think can be really, really highlighted in setting up a technical working group and strengthening the regional management council. I think this is very important to also to look at, because this is also very important. And then economic program. So any more that from our leaders who are in the webinar right now? How about regulation? Do you need to really policy environment? Do you have something to say on policies? I think there was also a discussion on policy and legal environment. Is there anything that you want to also look at the legal environment? Or investment side? We have 2 minutes to go. Yeah?
Yes,
ahead.
Policy is an important component. I think we have very good policies right now. The only thing that lacks is the enforcement, especially at the local level. In the case of the peatland management, we have an existing House bill right now, and we hope that we can also endorse this. We can help this, make this bill discussed also at the Congress, because we don't have a specific policy right now with regards to the peatland management in the Philippines.
Mila.
Thank you.
Judah here. In relation to number 5.
Yeah.
Hi, Mila. It's Judah here before I get lost again.
Yes.
In relation to number 5. For the river basin, as mentioned earlier by Vic in his presentation, only one of the 3 clustered watersheds in cluster 5 have an existing management council. Now we know in the experience of Cagayan de Oro, Nagusan, and other major river basins that there are different configurations about how a legal structure can be arrived at, but that we'd very much like to learn from the older river basins in terms of governance structures, and so that the stakeholders in cluster 5 can collectively agree on what is most appropriate for Leyte in terms of number 5. Thank you.
That's good.
Ma'am Mila, correction
Yes.
lang po, enforcement po, not involvement. Although related naman sila. But they used the
Ano
word
yun?
enforcement. Enforcement po instead of involvement.
Can you repeat? Di ko marinig yung ano, import, ano?
Enforcement po.
Enforcement.
Enforcement
Okay.
environmental laws.
Okay. Thank you. Okay, any more? Okay, so let me summarize some of the, I'm going to, I would like to ask Judah for you to look at the priority programs, the immediate one, as to the 5 elements that we have put into the discussion to wrap up. So, do you think, Judah, as the leader of the program, which one do you feel would be the first one that is more immediate in terms of your the organization? Do you think the first one is to set up the Regional Management Council?
Mila, thank you, but I wouldn't like myself to be called the leader of the whole management council because I am.
Okay. Okay.
I think it's more appropriate, in fact, for us, as mentioned earlier by our colleague, Pauline Naira, for all the stakeholders in Leyte to discuss whatever we have now in terms of integration. But it's also important, I think, for Vic Chu, he being the focal person of the River Basin Management Office of the DENR 8, as well as Executive Director Dr. Tony Danyo, to perhaps share with us his thoughts on this. Okay, because I think that's the very reason why we have Dr. Danyo with us this noon, so that maybe Dr. Tony, you can initially respond to this integration statement that we have all agreed to come up with, so that maybe the stakeholders in Cluster 5, Dr. Tony, can further take this forward, and we can be guided by your response and your words of wisdom. So is it okay, Mila, if I hand over now the floor?
Yes. Okay.
To,
so I put this on the table, and I think it's appropriate for the response now in relation to this. I'm going to save this and do some editing for our okay.
Thank you. So may I give the floor now to the Executive Director of the DENR's River Basin Control Office, Dr. Antonio Danyo, to say his response and message to these webinar participants. Dr. Tony?
Yeah. Ito na ba yung part ko, Judah?
Yes,
sorry, to all the participants, sorry that I could not stay for the whole duration of this webinar. As mentioned by ERD this morning, there is an ongoing DENR Executive Committee meeting at this time. so I have to attend into that also. But when I came back, the discussion is, I think, more on something to do with the priorities that are relative into the master plan. And I also were able to hear even the structure, possible structure of the council, and even mention about the leadership. But I think if we look at the different river basin council organization at this time, you will notice that considerable council being led by non-government organizations. I think the Cagayan de Oro River is one example, being led by the church, the same way with the Mindanao River Basin, and the same way with the Cebu River Basin. But there are also river basins that are being led by provincial governors, the Abra, for example, even the Pampanga River Basin. So I think from that, it just points out that the leadership really would be more on whom the stakeholders think can lead them in realizing their visions, or in realizing the vision of the contained in the master plan. But again, maybe as the group continues to discuss, maybe you have seen some who seems to champion the establishment of the river basin. But I will not say who, no, but as I've mentioned, the examples that we have an example of a river basin led by a local government. We have a river basin that the council is being led by non-government organizations. Of course, there are river basin that are led by DNR, and even a river basin that are led by an academe. I think the Davao is under the academe. So you have the liberty of discussing who would really was really, I would say, appropriate, or who's really the leader that can lead the council in achieving its what it intends to achieve. You know? But again, maybe as we are about to end our program, I would like to express this opportunity I will take this opportunity to express my thanks to Wetland International for organizing this webinar on business planning, landship investment plan approach in enhancing the Leyte Cluster 5 River Basin and Leyte Sab-a Peatland Forest Management Plan. I would say from the very start that I believe that we who are here, you who could stay and listen to all the discussions in this webinar, all recognize that the need to build a resilience community in a landscape or in a seascape. And I believe that as we do our respective job, our mandate wholeheartedly, whether we are working in the government or in non-government organizations, we contribute in small way in realizing our dream of having a resilient communities, particularly in our province. But for RBCO, we continue to adhere that having an integrated river basin management plan is one key needed in reaching our goal. And I would like to express my thanks to people who help us. Maybe I could, of course, I need to mention Judah and his team, because of your support, because of your work, it makes our job in integrated river basin development a little easier for this cluster. So of course, integrated area development requires stakeholders' support, no? But in order to get their support, they need to be aware. And thank you, Vic, for your presentations earlier in this webinar. And I hope that the audience get a clearer picture of what the master plan envisions. Maybe you can also start discussing whether you continue to use the word cluster 5 or use Palo, Binahaan, and other name as Palo, Binahaan clustered river basins, or later on you can maybe have it as a Leyte clustered river basins. No? So I just would like to point out that the use of cluster 5 is more for easier identification for us, as we have 8 clustered river basins simultaneously having master plan formulations. So I hope slowly, with the addition of Sab-a Basin, following a landscape-based management plan, we can expand the cluster and slowly reach a provincial clustered river basins. Maybe earlier the discussion on the clustered river, what would be the structure? Maybe we can have an individual council, but on top of that is really the head of the Leyte clustered watershed management council, or you may call it the clustered river basin council. So there would be greater participations of all the stakeholders in the concerned watershed or in the concerned river basin. Oh, but plans remains a plan or just be a wish without the necessary financial support. So the master plan or the Sab-a plan contains investment plan that need to be implemented. And of course, our government through various departments have a big role or responsibility in providing support. But we cannot fully rely on our government for reasons that we all, I think, quite aware. We are not a rich country. And in fact, last Tuesday, and again this coming Friday, we have a continued meeting on the status of Sustainable Development Goal 6.5.2, particularly on IWRM implementations, and which is measured in terms of the enabling environment, in terms of the institutions and participations, in terms of the management instruments and financing. Our assessment is that in terms of enabling environment, we're in the average or above average. We are good in the formulations of the laws and policies and the like. In terms of institutions and participations, though we have a lot of water resource agencies, but I think that our democratic system enable us to establish institutions and have the participation of the stakeholders. But in terms of management instruments, I think we have good plans. Both it could be the River Basin Master Plan, be the different local government plans. But when it comes to financing, I think most of us agree that RM program really lags behind. And that's one area that we need to improve. But thank you, for this group, for these organizations that through this webinar, you are helping different organizations helping us find ways, no, to generate funds, which is very, very critical. No? So this webinar on best business planning is very timely, no, as we rally together stakeholders for their support to realize our vision in addressing disaster poverty issue in our province. No? COVID affects our health, our environment, our economy, and the webinar topic actually connects in one way or another into these issues. No? Allow me also to, I think this morning, to share with you that we constantly communicate with Mike, Buck, and Irene. No? I think some of you familiar with them from South Korea. As we continue to work in refining the projects for possible GCF funding, that's the climate resilient flood management in the province of Leyte. Actually, the next Monday, again, we'll have the meeting and continue to discuss what's still lacking in the proposal. And we hope that the integrated governance in nature-based climate change adaptation and the other component of the project will help in improving the resilience of our communities, no? As well as provide motivation in the implementation of investment plans contained in our master plan, contained in our Sab-a plan, and the like. And we are happy that collaborative works with various organizations like this, the Wetland International and others. And we hope that we continue to have this very, very healthy and fruitful discussion relative into the directions and relative into the priorities. No? But one thing I can only say that as we continue to join hands, no, in achieving the dream of our beloved province, a resilient Leyte communities, then working together, I think we can achieve what we want. No? So in behalf of the DENR RBCO, I would like to express my congratulations for the successful webinar. And I hope that we would have more discussions. And this is just the very, very start of the discussions in working together for the implementations of our plan, for the implementation of different investment plan, for the realization of our dream. Again, damo nga salamat, no? Maupay nga aga, tayo nga tanan. And thank you for inviting RBCO in this gathering. Thank you, ma'am.
Damo nga salamat, Doc Tony, for your inspiring words. Please know that as a volunteer and partner of RBCO 8, that we're very much willing. Wetlands International Philippines Eastern Leyte is very much willing to support the ongoing discussions that you're having with the GCF. It's good that you mentioned it. And as a way of taking this forward, we initially agreed with Mila that we can have a further detailed workshop, hopefully within the month, initially September 10. So thank you again, Doc Tony. With that, I would like to call on my principal, the country representative of Wetlands International Philippines, Dr. Annadel Cabanban, for her closing remarks.
Thank you very much, Judah. Thank you, everyone, for participating in this webinar. Thank you so much for our resource persons, Dr. Judith, to Ms. Juvie, and to Mr. Victor Ivy. And I wish to also thank especially Dr. Anya for his special remarks and his encouragement. And for the next steps, we will continue to assist and support the River Basin Management Council and the Sab-a Peatland Management Council for building the business plan and financial architecture that will help implement this important plans in Eastern Leyte. Thank you very much. Damo gid nga salamat sa tanan. Bye for now.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Congrats. Thank you.
Salamat, Heidi.
Yes, Judah. Congrats, ha? Leader.
Congratulations, ha?
Thank you.
Sorry, ha? It's Judah. Si ano pala, si Vic. Vic, thank you sa presentation.
Thank you, Doc Tony.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Ay, thank you, Judah. Sige, balik ako sa kabila.
Thank you po.
Bye-bye. Congrats.
Thank you.
Bye, ma'am.
Bye-bye. Bye, Risa. Bye, Shin, and everybody.
Bye.
Bye-bye. See you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Ay,
Yeah.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye.
Ay, ma'am, pwede niyo na po i-end yung sa live Facebook.
Okay. Okay, stop live stream. Okay, thank you, Sheena, for your help. Thank you.
Ma'am, salamat din po. Nakalahute rin
So,
yun.
Yeah, so at least merong next steps na gagawin yung September 10 for the workshop. Yeah.
Yeah.
With
Yeah, I
Judah.
will send the...
Yeah.
Oh.
Okay.
Sige.
So thank
Thank
you.
you.
Thank you po. Bye-bye.
I'll give ano yung format ng workshop for next week. Thank you.